What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Book Binge this week for episode 51 on the show. Today, we're going to be talking about what I'm excited to read this year in 2023. Now, this isn't going to be a definitive TBR or anything for everything that I plan to get to this year, obviously, because even I, who structure my, as somebody who structures my TBR uh, quite fully, I guess I'll say. Um, it still doesn't tend to last more than a few months, especially where, the variable types of stuff are involved. So for this video, not all of this is in permanent ink. Some of the things that I talk about will be more or less in permanent ink. Some of the other things will not. I will otherwise note what is and isn't, more or less 100% confirmed. Anyways, let's get into how much I plan to read this year, because admittedly, it's not going to be a whole lot comparatively. First, I want to talk about that quantity. In 2022, I read about 45 books. Now, a few of those books are more akin to short story collections or similar. I read Tales of the Sun Eater Volumes 1 and 2, which are both short story collections. I also read A Christmas Carol and Other Christmas Writings by Charles Dickens. So again, a little bit of a short story-esque type of collection rather than an actual novel. I'm still counting the collections as books that I read just for the sake of ease and without getting into too much technicalities. I read about 45 books in 2022, which was really impressive for me. When I started the year out in 2022, my goal was to read about 35 books, but then I increased it to 40 to push myself a little bit, and then I ultimately got to 45, even with some pretty big, chunky books that I read, including the main Sun Eater series, at least the first three books in that, which all three of those are not short. They're not necessarily huge, but they're not short. There are multiple entries in the Dark Tower that were pretty long. I especially considering War and Peace and Les Mis, because I read both of those in 2022 as well. I read a lot more than I had ever anticipated that I would over the course of the year. But truthfully, my goal for 2023 is closer to that 35 book range. In fact, I'm actually setting myself a lower limit of 30 books over the course of the entire year. Now, if I read more than that, that's great. But the main thing is, for why I want to cut down on my reading just a little bit, is that I don't actually want to spend all of my waking moments essentially reading. That's not something. But by the time I got halfway through this year, I was starting to get a little bit tired of doing that. And especially over the second half of the year, like I said, I'd spent so much time reading that I was neglecting a lot of other things in my life, including my exercising and working out and stuff like that. So I have a bunch of other stuff that I want to work on, including personal stuff and being able to do stuff with friends, that spending 3 to 5 hours every single day reading pretty much, it's just not going to be sustainable for me in 2023. So I do not plan to do that. Instead, I'd prefer to keep that at approximately 2 or so hours a day, preferably not necessarily as a maximum. I'd like to not go over 3 hours a day if I can help it. And if that goes as low as being only 1 to 1.5 hours a day every once in a while, I'm honestly fine with that, because like I said, I have a bunch of other projects that I want to be able to start working on. But that is stuff that I don't need to go into more detail here. But even with that being said, my tentative TBR for all of 2023 is still a significant more than that 30 to 35 book range. But let's just actually get into some of the actual items that I plan to be reading this year. First off, I'm going to get into some of the series that I want to read. Now, my most anticipated long-term read, especially for the year, is going to be Wheel of Time. This is 100% guaranteed. I will be starting the series this year, and I'm going to read at least three, but preferably about four books over the course of the entire year. I'm going to be starting them in March with The Eye of the World, and be reading one book approximately every 2 months until I finish the series. So it'll take me a little bit, but I will absolutely 100% be starting the series this year. My most anticipated read on the more short-term side of things is going to be Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, which you can see up on the shelf right there. this one is one that I've been excited to read. Nearly on a level with Wheel of Time for a few months now, and I've really wanted to be able to get into it. And since it's a little bit shorter, each of the books is shorter than your average Wheel of Time book, and it's only 4 of them rather than 15 of them. I 100% plan to read the series in 2023. Whether I get all 4 books in is not entirely guaranteed, but if I can help it, I would like to get all 4 of these books in alongside 3 or 4 books of Wheel of Time, and those will probably be like my main chunky heavy hitters throughout the year, not including occasionally big classics that I'll get into later. And those are going to be the brand new series to me that I plan to start or read in 2023. I also plan to do a few more rereads. As some of you know, in 2022, I reread Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan and The Kane Chronicles by Rick Riordan. And actually, I think I had plans to reread maybe another series in 2023 or 2022 that I never got the chance to. This year, I plan to do a few rereads in a similar vein. I'm absolutely going to be rereading The Heroes of Olympus by Rick Riordan, which is, I'm super excited to do that because that series is one of my all-time favorites. I think um, if I had done a, top 5 favorite book series or something like that prior to this reading journey, mostly in 2022, Heroes of Olympus would have been probably number 2 on that list, but for all intents and purposes, tied with number 1 as my favorite. The second reread that I want to do in 2023 is going to be The Underland Chronicles by Suzanne Collins. This is another one of my favorites. In fact, this is the one that Heroes of Olympus would be tied with as my number 1 favorite if I had ranked them, previous to me reading any new stuff. I absolutely love both of these series, and I'm 100% going to be rereading both of them. And since they're both YA, and with the Underland Chronicles especially being slightly more middle grade side of things, but both of them being YA, both of them being real short, only 5 books each, with each of those books being not very lengthy and definitely not very complicated. I have zero doubts that I'll be able to get through each of these. If I wanted to, I could probably get through each of these series in a month each if I wanted to, possibly even less. Not saying that's what I'm going to do, but that's absolutely what I plan to do. And then the third reread is more tentatively on here because I don't know if I'm going to do it this year or not, but it is the 39 Clues series, which is by various authors, both the original series of 11 books as well as the Cahills versus Vespers books, the second series, which is made up of 6 entries. This was probably the series that got me into reading, and these are definitely more on the elementary school, middle grade side of things. Like, I wouldn't even classify 39 Clues as YA because they're even younger than the YA audience typically would be, and that's fine. I just have real fond memories for the series. I'm pretty sure I've read the original 39 Clues series 4 times over the course of my life. It's been a long time since I've done every read of them, but I absolutely plan to be able to get to them, another reread sooner than later. And I'm kind of curious to see how well they actually hold up, especially being for so young of readers as they are meant to be for. This one is not a guarantee that I'll get to it this year, unlike the previous 4 series that I've discussed. This is like, if I need like legit palate cleansers, like of books that I can just read in like a day, I can, pick up one of these pretty easily without feeling like it's any form of heavy commitment. So it's kind of, tentatively on this TBR as like I'd kind of like to get to it. This would also inflate the amount of books that I've read over the course of the year for them being so short and easy, but that's a completely other point entirely. So how about some standalones? What are some standalones that I'd like to get to this year? Well, I was originally planning to be able to read Stephen King and Michael Crichton over the course of 2022 far more efficiently and quicker than I ended up doing. I only actually got through the 3 Stephen King books that I did in 2021, and then in 2022 I read all 8 of the Dark Tower books, but that's not like reading the standalones in the chronological order of, well, I guess in published order, the way that I plan to do it. So I haven't gotten to Stephen King in a little bit, and I would like to read at least a couple more of his books. The next few that I have in order for me to read are going to be Rage, and then Night Shift, the short story collection, and then The Long Walk. And I would like to fit at least those three in over the course of the year, but we'll kind of see how things go, of course. And then on terms of Michael Crichton, I've actually only read the one Michael Crichton book in 2022, and then the sequel to that by a completely different author, those being The Andromeda Strain and The Andromeda Evolution. I would like to get into at least a couple more Michael Crichton. I don't know how many, so for the moment, I'd like to say I would at least like to get to two of his books. Those being The Terminal Man and The Great Train Robbery. So the other two books in the 3-book collection that Andromeda Strain is also a part of. Those two books I would like to get to. If I get beyond that, that would be pretty dope, but nothing that I'm going to, plan on being able to get to, because then I'll find myself reading way more than I want to read just so that I can be, quote unquote, caught up with my TBR or whatever. So there's some of that. And then there's a couple others specifically in April that I want to get into because of like nostalgia type of reasons. Those being The Card Turner by Louis Satcher and 127 Hours, originally titled Between a Rock and a Hard Place by Aaron Ralston. Those two books are books that I've read. I've probably read each of those two. I've read 127 Hours 3 times. I've read The Card Turner probably like 5 or 6 times. And they're personal favorites of mine. I absolutely love those two books. And I'm pretty sure every single time I've read either of those, it has been in that late March, early April time period around when spring break occurred. In my school, at least growing up, because that was when I always read those books, was around that time period. So because of that, I want to, give them another reread here soon. And I would like to do that in April because of that nostalgia time period type of feeling. So that's something that I'm excited to do. And then, of course, there will, as always, be a solid amount of classics because we do a monthly classic read along where we read a new classic every month, except for the really chonky ones that sometimes take 2 months. Looking at you, books like Les Mis and Count of Monte Cristo. But that's something that I'm going to be doing as well. I can't, say for sure what books are going to be made up in that list of classics, except for I'm going to be doing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea this year, this month in January, because that's the book for the month. And then in June, I have a personal read along for Robinson Crusoe that I'm going to be doing. If you want to, consider joining along, that would be awesome. But that's pretty much all of the standalones that I plan to get into in 2023. So is there anything else? Well, actually, there is a little bit more that I do plan to get to over the course of the year. Those being within these two collections right back here, the Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe and the Complete Fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. I've been wanting to get into both of these authors pretty much the entirety of 2022, and I especially wanted to, read at least a short story or two by each of them in October of 2022, but my TBR in October got really out of hand, and I probably spent 5 or 6 hours reading every single day of that month just to be caught up on everything that was going on. And that doesn't even include the fact that I played all of the original Dad of War game from 2018 in that month as well. So I spent a lot of time reading that month. It was pretty insane. So I never actually ended up getting to H.P. Lovecraft or Edgar Allan Poe. I will be doing that this year. I would plan to do one or more short stories by H.P. Lovecraft every month. If I can, it'll probably only be one a month for the time being, just so that I can keep myself a little bit paced. Plus, it'll keep my TBR down a little bit so I'm not spending as much time reading, like I said before. And I would like to do at least one short story from Poe every month as well, alongside Lovecraft. And then, when it comes to the number of poems that I do by Edgar Allan Poe every month, who knows, because they're all of varying lengths and complexity. I'm going to take those as, they come in whatever I feel like works for me as I'm reading them. But now that I've talked about all of that, what didn't exactly make the cut, at least for now, in this general TBR for 2023. Well, the biggest regret for me that I'm definitely not confirming myself of being able to fit, because I'm not going to give myself that burden, is the Legacy trilogy by Matthew Ward. These books up here, you probably can't see them super well on camera, but you can see the bottoms of them. Those being Legacy of Ash, Legacy of Steel, and Legacy of Light. This is a trilogy with super, super dope covers, and that the few people who I know who have read them just sing their praises so much, and a series that I wanted to get to relatively soon anyway, just because they looked really cool and had really interesting concept. So I'm actually really, really, really super sad to be postponing Legacy Trilogy, most likely until 2024. But given that I had already basically confirmed myself of being able to fit in Faithful and the Fallen in 2023, I'm not going to get to those as easily. Another thing that didn't make the cut, again for the similar reasons, was Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams, which is right up there. This was one that I, want to get to eventually, but not one that I have super high priority for. It's not quite like the Legacy trilogy, where my pushing it back by a year or however long I need to push it back really saddens me. It's just one that I'm having to push off just a little bit, because obviously I don't have all of the time in the world to read, and I'm not a very fast reader in the first place. Another series that didn't make the cut was 5 Warrior Angels by Brian Lee Durfee. A ton of people who I share a Discord server with read this series this year, especially since the last book in the trilogy came out at the end of November. This is one that I want to get to, and I've heard people compare it to Faithful and the Fallen as well, just even darker than Faithful and the Fallen. So if I enjoy Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, I will be excited to get to 5 Warrior Angels sooner than later. Nothing that I can say more about that. And then, of course, other things that didn't make the cut is several other YA series, including like Harry Potter, which I haven't read yet. Rereading the Lorien Legacies by Pittacus Lore, that I absolutely love that series. And then, just a few other things that a little bit easier and simpler that I'm not going to have the time to be able to read. Those all got pushed off. So that's an idea of what I hope to get to over the course of my year in reading, what my TBR generally might look like-ish. So obviously you can come back for the first episode of the Book Binge that comes out every the first Tuesday of every month, generally speaking, is when my monthly TBR and reading wrap-up comes out. So if you ever want to know, or if you're interested in what I'm reading at any given moment, or what I'm planning to read over the course of a month, you can check those out each month, as well as my bi-weekly update series, Fortnight on the Isle. Those come out every other Sunday for an update on what I am actually currently reading and where I'm at in those books and whatnot, just to follow along with my progress, which is always super fun. We shall see what of this list I actually end up getting through, given all of my other planned projects, including getting more into reading, restarting my blog, getting more into writing, restarting my blog, doing more work along the terms of that, as well as actually getting the scripts written for a lot of my scripted reviews that I'd like to get back into, and being able to spend time editing those videos, because that takes a lot of time. So that's all stuff that I'm super excited for. Consider checking out, as always, seasonalproductions.com for easy access to all of the projects that I work on, including a backlog of all of my YouTube videos. All of my writing that I do, I release over there, including the videos from this main YouTube channel that I just mentioned, as well as gaming, Let's Plays, and similar stuff from my second King Crusoe channel called King Crusoe VODs, where I do long-form gaming type of content that's, at this point, at least any new content that I make for that channel will be unedited, because the reason I stopped doing Let's Plays in the first place was because I hated editing them. So if I'm not editing them, I can just record stuff and throw them over there, and if you're interested in checking out any of that, you are free to do so, and I'd appreciate that. Then, of course, like I said, all of my writing, which I am going to be revamping and ramping up all over the course of the year. I hope you are as excited for my 2023 reading journey as I am, as well as everything else. So thank you guys for watching, just as always, and I'll be back again in the next episode of the Book Binge.